Spud eats again. On April 12, 1945, at 5:20 p.m., an F5 tornado first touched down southwest of Antlers near the Hall community. 25 minutes later, at 5:45 p.m., this tornado, one of the most devastating in the history of the state of Oklahoma, struck the city of Antlers with a width of nearly 1/2 mile. The tornado entered the southwest part of the city, going through to the northeast, destroying, with few exceptions, every physical object in its path. A total of 69 people eventually died as a result of injuries received in the storm. A total of 243 people were injured, 375 homes were lost, and 250 buildings were destroyed. At the same time, my dad, L.C. Ratliff, I wasn't born yet, was thousands of miles away from his home in Antlers in the Pacific. He was serving aboard a Navy seagoing tug, doing final cleanup in Pearl Harbor and Wake Island. I remember Dad talking about them getting news on his ship that the tornado had destroyed Antlers and killed dozens of people. No one in the Navy knew anything more than that the town of Antlers was pretty much gone and a lot of people were dead. No names. Dad was stuck out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with no way to get any information other than to wait and hope someone from his family had survived and could write him a letter. It turned out that his grandparents who raised him, Ernest and Ida Mae Ratliff, had survived the Antlers tornado. This was probably because they lived in a low-lying area just outside of Antlers, north of Standpipe Hill, that their home had been passed over. He finally received a letter his grandparents mailed him with first-hand news of the tornado and the health and well-being of his kinfolks. I was probably 10 or 12 when I heard this story about the tornado, and other than thinking that it had to be a living hell being thousands of miles away from your home and not able to get any information about your loved ones. I wish now I'd asked my dad a few more questions, but at the time it just didn't interest me that much, so any more details than I've already mentioned are probably lost forever. My main character in this story, Spud, may have been out in the Pacific like my dad as a member of the Navy in the 1940s. Or maybe he was a soldier in the Army at the same time my dad was a sailor. When I heard Spud's story, I was able to piece together a theory that more than likely could be very close to the truth. My dad did not know Spud until many years after the war, and even then it appears he only knew who he was and what he did, but they were never close. I suspect Spud may have been a few years older than my dad, who was born in 1928. Spud was what you would call a street person today, but in Antlers, Oklahoma, street person was an oddity in itself, seeing as Antlers didn't have much more than one street to begin with. I have been able to piece together that Spud was what is commonly known as a tortured artist. He was definitely very talented as a sign painter, and I gather from scattered pieces of information that he was a very intelligent person. His knowledge more than likely came from reading and just a genuine interest in what was going on around him. This worldly knowledge would have been one more thing that made him that much more of a loner in Pushmataha County in the 50s. A hawk is an eagle among crows is an old Indian saying that may well have applied to Spud. I would never have known Spud's story, even to the small degree that I do, except one day when I was outside the old pool hall in Antlers, I noticed down in the corner of the glass window years ago someone had painted, "Spud Eats Again," in small fancy lettering. No one at the pool hall seemed to know anything about it, so that evening I told my dad about it, and he told me what little I was ever to know about Spud. Dad started out by saying Spud got messed up in the war, which was a catch-all phrase that pretty much covered everything. Everyone back then took that as all the explanation needed. Dad said Spud was a drunk, which was also the technical term for alcoholic. He said that the only kind of work anyone ever saw Spud do was to paint signs for the local businesses in town. Spud's one little quirk was he always signed each sign he painted with "Spud Eats Again." This to me was pretty self-explanatory, as well as revealing about his lifestyle. Dad said he had often heard that Spud would get messed up by drinking cough syrup he would buy from the local drugstore, but he didn't know if there was any truth to that or not. Spud's story has always intrigued me, along with another strange ghost story revolving around a young woman's death in the 1945 Antlers storm. It has always seemed a miracle that my dad's family was untouched by the tornado, while some of their friends and neighbors were wiped out. It also seems strange and out of character that an intelligent man like Spud would come back to Antlers after the war and then would spend the remainder of his life as an unproductive member of this small town community, when he could have gone on to become a pillar of that community. This tells me something may have happened in that tornado that touched Spud's life and touched it deeply. Are these two stories somehow connected, the young blonde ghost and the homeless painter? The blonde woman ghost story tells how after the tornado in Antlers, the devastation was almost beyond human comprehension. A beautiful girl's body was discovered in the top of a tree blown up there by the tornado. It was very hard for the men trying to recover her body because it had been impaled by a large tree limb. The legend says to this day, when a storm comes up in Antlers, her voice can be heard crying out, "Someone please help me." Who was this young woman from the Antlers ghost story? Could she have been the love of Spud's life? Was she the reason he wandered the streets for years, unable to leave Antlers and her? And is their legacy just her voice in a storm crying out, "Someone please help me," and his message on a dusty pool hall window that reads, "Spud Eats Again"? It is more than likely a mystery that will remain lost in Pushmataha County history. I would like to add that although this story is fiction, Spud was a real person who lived in Antlers, Oklahoma, and was probably painting signs there in the late 40s and early 50s. I never knew his last name, and if anyone from the area remembers anything about him, I would appreciate hearing from you.